So how is it there today in the morning, Jane?
The day is good so far. Yep, it's a spring day and it's warming up and the grass is growing and all
Wow.
good.
Lovely. Hello everyone. Today we have with us a very special guest, Miss Jane Hardwicke Collings. She's a founder of Shamanic Women Craft, which is an organization she created, which is into coaching or educating women and people who relate to feminine in various feminine healing principles. Bring in shamanic principles and practices to connect with transformational rites of passage. So right from birth, our periods, to our childbirth, to I think menopause and even death. This is what she does, and I'm so honored and excited to be part of this conversation to learn from her and also to get into conversation around feminine healing, which is much needed, and how can we imbibe in our day-to-day lives. So thank you so much, Jane, for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Ashwini. It's an honor, and thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation.
The very first question is, how did you go about choosing this path of healing? And if you look back to your journey so far, your path which you have journeyed so far, what are some of the memories that you can, which stands out?
Yes, okay, great question. Well, I'm 63 now, so it's been a while to get to here. I'm postmenopausal and I've been through that whole journey. But how I got to choose this path, well, I never thought I would. I didn't even know it was a path, to be fair. I was a midwife and a home birth midwife, so helping women have their babies in their own homes as opposed to hospitals. And so I was an independent or private midwife. And I never expected that I would end up doing what I'm doing now, which is running an international women's mystery school. But I can see how it all fits and all works out. So how I got to here really, I think, is through my midwifery career. I learned to be a midwife when I was 25, and I did that because I wanted to have a baby of my own and I wanted to learn all about it, which ended up not being exactly the kind of information I wanted to learn, but I had the basic framework of how midwifery is taught within the system. But when I did my midwifery training, I had a spiritual awakening, actually, and I didn't even know that there was such a thing at that time. So I just grew up in a typical patriarchal family where my dad was the boss and my mum was the mum and the housekeeper and all that kind of stuff. I didn't know that there was anything different to that, to anything else. It was all I knew. But when I did my midwifery training, what happened was a bit of a shock in my awakening. So what happened was that I saw what I call institutionalized acts of abuse and violence being done to mothers and babies masquerading as safety. And that really shocked me and woke me up to the patriarchal culture. I didn't even know that there was that. I didn't even know what that meant then. So that's nearly 40 years ago. So basically what that experience did was awaken me to how the oppression of women and the feminine was actually playing out in women's lives at birth. So that sent me in a completely different direction to where I thought I was going, and I went to become a home birth midwife where women were more awake and aware of their choices and of birth. And so I learned so much there in my midwifery practice as a home birth midwife. I learned what normal really is as opposed to controlled normal or whatever you want to say. And then so I was a home birth midwife for about 30 years. I think the next big thing that happened for me was at the end of my 20s, in my 30s. I met a teacher. I met a woman that ended up being a great teacher and mentor to me over in America. Her name was Jane Hardwicke Collings. She's dead now. Her teachings really helped me put together my two special favorite passions, midwifery and shamanism. which I was learning all about at the time, which to me was really about reconnecting with the earth and shamanic practices, etc. So when I joined those two things together through her teachings, then everything started making heaps more sense to me. And I brought that to my midwifery practice and saw the weaving of our connection with the earth and the cycles and birth as part of that. And then, of course, my own babies, having my own babies. I had 3 babies and really guided me on this journey, this path, because the births that I had, I was not expecting to have. That was a massive teaching for me. You know, like I thought I would just have a baby, and I certainly didn't. I had, for my first birth, I had an experience that really taught me that through what happened, how much I needed to heal myself and learn about myself before I could let go and have a baby in the way that that process requires. So I was planning to have a baby at home, and what ended up happening is I went to hospital, and because I was pushing for hours and hours and I couldn't budge him, I couldn't push his head out. But basically later on, what I realized, the head that I couldn't push was my own. I was trying to control the process, but I didn't know I was doing that. And what I learned from that birth was about surrender, because I didn't surrender. So that really helped me. That experience taught me, because births are our teachers, our children are our teachers. And that birth taught me of what I ended up calling the shamanic dimensions of birth. So that how we give birth is not a random experience. It's like the culmination of our life thus far. It's like a readout of our beliefs, attitudes, and fears. And so what that first birth taught me was how much I needed to control a situation to feel safe. Now, you can't control birth. So that was a big teaching for me. So that was huge, my own births. I ended up having 2 other births vaginally, home vaginal births after cesareans. And then I guess the other thing that happened was me beginning to teach the women's mysteries in one-day workshops to women. So about menstrual cycle, about reclaiming feminine knowledge, wisdom, and power. So I've been doing those sorts of workshops for about 30 years. And then in 2008, so that's, what's that now? 13 years ago, I started the School of Shamanic Womancraft. And that's now a training process and a teacher training program. And yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful school. And how I ended up doing that, which is not what I expected I would do, is probably because I dedicated my life to the goddess. And what I mean by the goddess is the earth, the divine feminine and as if the earth. And so what I feel like my life shows are the missions that the goddess has given me. So that's a long answer to that question, but that's kind of how I see the story.
So much powerful, such a powerful sharing, Jane. You know, your being itself gives us a lot of lessons and wisdom on how, you know, there are more ways of being on earth. And for me, at least, I've not crossed that stage, but to understand any form of birth for a feminine is, I think, a case of surrender, and to get out of all the blocks in our head. And I think that's one of the biggest learning for me also, that how much we want to control, and that comes maybe from fear within, and lack of trust. Once you have a goddess or a divine mother looking over, that kind of beautifully transforms it into a surrendered form. But till then, we hold on to it so tight. And somewhere in current generation, that has been a disconnect, So you did a reclaiming 40 years back, and still we feel disconnected. A lot of women even today are wanting to reclaim and go back through the entire process. So I think I don't know how many more years where we can have generations of healed generations started coming through. So that's
hopefully now.
Absolutely. Jane, moving on to, so starting with menstruation shame and menstruation stigma itself. Um, how did we as a society come about in shaming the very life force energy that flows in a woman? And how, in what way is the shame connected to the lack of, healthy periods, which we see in most of the women around? Is there a connection?
Well, that's the right question, Ashwini. How did we get into this situation in the first place? And that's a sad story, actually, because menstrual shame is one of the root or foundational principles of the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is about the suppression and oppression of women and the feminine, and menstrual shame is known as one of the what's called organizing principles of the patriarchy to maintain the oppression of women. So if menstrual shame is the dominant perspective, then that has us all in that process. Not just women, men too, everybody is under this umbrella of menstrual shame. And even if they don't think they are, they can't not be. It's been present in the patriarchal culture since the origins of it, like 3,000 years ago. And it's also in most of the original religious texts, there are words that say things like, I'm just going to read it. Anti-menstrual sentiment can be found in the key texts of all major faiths. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism have all preached that menstrual blood and women who menstruate are unclean, impure, and responsible for everything from failing crops to contaminated meat. So that's what the religious texts say. And then the other thing is that how this affects us. So menstrual shame leads to body shame. And body shame leads to low self-esteem, body dysmorphia, all manner of wounded behaviors like eating disorders, self-harm, mental health stuff like anxiety and depression. And also menstrual shame leads to dangerous and risky sexual decision making. So in our world where we are under the influence of menstrual shame, and even in our world there is kind of encouragement for women to avoid their periods. Like you can take the pill or whatever, and you can suppress your period so you never have a period. And this is encouraged, suppression of menstrual cycle. And so if we reject our menstrual cycle, which is what we're kind of encouraged to do, then we reject our body. And if we reject our body, we reject ourselves. And if we reject ourselves, we are lost to ourselves. And that's the current situation. We are lost to feminine knowledge, wisdom, and power. We've lost it, and we are lost from it. So that's really like how it all happened, and then how it affects us as I've already said. So menstrual shame leads to body shame and all of those sorts of negative behaviors, but it also leads to menstrual pathology, which is, not healthy periods, basically because the menstrual cycle will do whatever she has to do to get your attention. And if that's make it hurt more or bleed more or less or stop bleeding or get cranky or whatever, then that's the menstrual cycle getting our attention. Because the menstrual cycle is actually, and it's been recognized as this not that long ago by the medical profession, that the menstrual cycle is actually one of our vital signs. They're calling it the fifth vital sign, because the menstrual cycle is like a woman's experience of her menstrual cycle is like a readout of her well-being. And everything that's not kind of working in your life or any sort of imbalances show up in your menstrual cycle. So if we ignore that, we ignore the signs, the messages from our body,
Right.
And in ignoring our menstrual cycle, we learn to ignore our body and the messages that she gives us. And that's like a really dumb thing, because that's part of the mind-body connection, is that the body gives us information about what we need to do or stop doing or add or subtract or whatever. But so the menstrual pathology that we see today, which is continuing to rise all the time, I believe is all part of the culmination of menstrual shame and women not really knowing what's going on and not looking after themselves, and as I said, the menstrual cycle trying to get our attention. And you know, like, it's infertility is a menstrual cycle pathology, and that, like, you know, that's going through the roof. And endometriosis and adenomyosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, all of those things are part of menstrual cycle pathology, and they continue to increase. So that's and menstrual shame, I said already, affects everybody, but no equality between the sexes will ever happen until menstrual shame is gone and all the associated things like period poverty and the menstrual pathology that we've spoken about. So it's really important that we deal with this, and not just women. Like, it's a cultural thing, it's a everybody thing, and yeah. So that's what I think about that. Did
Yes,
I answer all those things? I'm not sure.
Yes, you did, and it was so important which you said, you know, that it shows us, like, the health of our being. Menstrual cycle shows us the health of our being, and how normalized even the period pain and period cramps have become. But I was reading up, like, how even to have period pain is not a normal condition. If we actually invite the menstrual cycle in a beautiful way, then, you know, even the pain is not there. It's a very surrendering and nice process for our body to rest and go through these cycles. So what you said makes absolute sense in all the menstrual pathology and how, and the problem seems now bigger. And you also already, the second question was just that which you touched upon, you know, that how crucial is it to overcome the menstrual shame in not only reclaiming womanhood, but for the culture and society as a whole. Which, do you want to have some more points on that, or we move
Well,
on?
yeah, I just think that it's really crucial, and my belief is that menstrual shame is actually one of the foundational things that is causing so many problems in the world, because women are, you know, under it like that, and men don't know anything about it, but they're just grossed out about it, and the children don't learn about it from their mother because the mothers don't, you know, feel it's a bit yucky or whatever. So it's only going to be through healing menstrual shame, or banishing menstrual shame, actually, like shedding it, banishing it, that we're going to be able to reach anything, like I mentioned already, like equality. Like, we should be having, and in your country has heaps more of this than many other countries, but menstrual and menopause workplace policies. Like, you know, that's when we start doing that and not seeing it as sick leave, it's just menstrual leave, then that kind of thing respects a woman's needs. And it's like, these are the things that are being ignored, and these are the things that maintain menstrual shame. So there's lots of ways to do this, like on a personal level and collectively. And one of the ways that mothers can do it and change the next generation's experience is by just really being very honest and open about having their period, you know, like, so you know, the children follow you to the toilet anyway, so you'd have to be doing some clever hiding to be hiding what you're doing. So it's best to just share what's going on, you know, and children just take in things to the level of their understanding. It's not going to freak them out or anything.
Jane, the next question being the extension of the same one, like how a menstruating person can begin to see the menstrual blood as a medicine to reconnecting with their own body and to heal and gain from its wisdom, you know.
Yeah, well, it's actually really easy. It's not even hard. It's so easy. All you have to do is pay attention to it. So begin to pay attention to the whole cycle, not just the blood part, because that's just a small part of it. You know, like that's like a 5-day part of a cycle that is usually 4 weeks long or more or less. So basically begin by paying attention to your cycle and chart your cycle. And I don't mean just ticking the calendar on the days that you bleed. I mean going through a process like a journaling process each day to figure out how you feel, you know, like how your body feels, what food you crave, what your energy levels are, what you do want to do, what you don't want to do. The point being that if you journal your menstrual cycle, chart your experience every day, and then you get to see how different you feel every day, because that's the point. We don't feel the same every day. So that's the first thing, charting your menstrual cycle. And then then you start to organize your life around your menstrual cycle, so that you're ovulating, you really go for it. You know, like if you've got to do any sort of presentations or podcasts or anything like that, do them when you're ovulating, because you'll have so much more energy and more kind of interest in being out there. So it's about beginning a conversation with your cycle and your body and planning your life around it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane, for those inputs.